We're going to be talking about salmon in this episode with Congressman Mike Simpson. Let's kick it. There exists a threat, from anti-hunting groups to politicians trying to give our land away, and we won't stand for it. Those vast western landscapes provide the space for our wildlife to thrive and a place for hunters and anglers to fuel the fire that sparks their soul. In this show, we share our love of hunting, fishing, and conservation. Here, we provide the foundation to meet these threats through passion and the grit of the American outdoorsman. Welcome to the Western Huntsman Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode number 67. This is Jim Huntsman, the host of the Western Huntsman Podcast, and I am coming at you from the Broken Time studio right here in Hayden, Idaho. Guys, thanks for joining us on the show today. We've got a big conversation coming up for you. A couple of announcements prior to getting to that conversation, and thanks everybody for kind of bearing with me last week and dealing with not a repeat episode, but an episode that I actually thought was a lot of fun, and apparently you guys did too, because we got a ton of downloads on it. So it looks like we're going to hit our deadline that I was talking about. Speaking of deadlines, today is, let's see, let me make sure tomorrow is right before I say that. Yeah, actually tonight. So actually, we're gonna push this. We're gonna push this because we still have entries coming in. I didn't realize, for some reason I thought the 12th was on Tuesday, but let's push this to Thursday at midnight on the 15th. Thursday at midnight on the 15th is when the youth contest, coloring contest pictures are sent back to me, and that's when they're due. Is going to be midnight on the 15th. So if you've got a kiddo between the ages of, I think it was up to 8 years old, and you jump on our Facebook or Instagram and find the coloring page of that big buck, and you print that off and have them color it and write their name on it and send it back to me. We're going to have a winner drawn on basically for next week's episode, just because we're running a little tight this week here. So we're going to push that to Thursday the 15th, which is in a few days. That'll give you some extra time. If you haven't had them enter, the winner's going to win a T-shirt that says the Western Huntsman on it. And I'm excited to get that taken out. And so what we're going to do is that's going to be a total random drawing. So don't worry about, if maybe your kid's not as good of a colorer as some other kid, or let's say you've got two siblings that are entering the contest, and one is older and much better at coloring within the lines than the other. Don't sweat that part, because this is just a random drawing. It's what I do is I take all the names and I put them into a Excel spreadsheet, and it picks a random winner on that one. So no worries on that. But let's get them into me by midnight on Thursday, April 15th, and we'll have a winner and go from there. By the way, we got a birthday announcement, and I'm hoping I'm going to say your last name right, buddy, but I'd like to say happy birthday to Dan Crollo. And you, sir, hopefully this is your week, man. And happy birthday to you. And thanks for being a listener on the show. If you guys have other birthday announcements out there, definitely let me know. So happy birthday, Mr. Crollo. I hope I said your name right. You know I'm famous for not pronouncing last names right. This episode is brought to you by Phelps Game Calls, the oldest sponsor on the Western Huntsman Podcast. Giving them a shout out. And guys, check out the Phelps Game Calls website, and you will find your turkey calls, your elk calls, predator calls, there's deer calls, all sorts of calls on the website. They've also got cool T-shirts and hats and swag items and things that you should check out and support Phelps Game Calls, because they're a hard-working company that does a great job making some of the best calls out there available on the market, hands down. I wouldn't say that if I didn't sincerely mean that. I want to thank Phelps Game Calls for being a sponsor on the show. And if you go to phelpsgamecalls.com, which will the link will be in the show notes, obviously, check out the calls. Again, turkey season's it's in some areas it's open. For us, it opens like Thursday, and I'm going to be out there on with this black bat from Phelps Game Calls, doing my best to call in a big old gobbler, and you should be too. especially. Turkeys are one of the best ways to get youth involved in hunting. Since we've been talking about youth hunters in the last couple episodes a little bit here and there with this contest coming up. But the calls are super. You don't have to sound perfect. You don't have to be like a competition turkey caller. Get you a Phelps game call, whether you're using a diaphragm or you're using like an external call to call in turkeys, and go out there and try it out. If you've never done it before, it's a hell of a time. And Phelps Game Calls has everything you need to get started this turkey season. And when you're there on the website, don't forget to check out to use, I forgot my promo code. Oh, Huntsman10. It's Huntsman10 for 10% off. And that will be, the link is in the show notes. Enjoy. Let me know. Let me know what you think. Okay. So folks, on this episode, this is going to be a little bit more of a serious conversation, and if you've been listening to this show a long time, sometimes we're pretty goofy and satire, and other times we're serious. In this case, it's going to be a serious conversation about a very serious proposal. And I want you guys to take what you hear in this episode and really think about it, and be open-minded going into this conversation. This is going to be with Congressman Mike Simpson of Idaho, who has made just this wildly huge proposal, right, to breach the 4 lower Snake River dams in hopes of recovering our wild salmon numbers. And I think it's a really important conversation. It's a very important topic, and it's been something that if you're not familiar with this, that's been going on. It's been litigated. It's been argued. There's been different proposals in the past for, we're talking 30, 40 years. This thing's been going on for decades. And finally, we're at a point where it's like, okay, the salmon are not recovering. I know that there's arguments. Well, back in 2013, there was a great salmon run and different arguments along those lines. That aside, guys, the consistent trend that we're seeing from a very fact-based position is our wild salmon are on a trajectory to extinction. Something has to be done. So as we talk about this, I know that this proposal has brought up a lot of arguing and a lot of tension on like social media and different areas where I think a lot of that is born out of some of the past arguments that were made that didn't have a lot of teeth in them, if that makes sense. And I'll give you a great example. For me, when I first heard about this proposal, and I'm talking to some of my friends about it, and they're all against it because for me, I'm kind of removed. I'm not a huge steelhead. I'm not a huge salmon fisherman, right? I'm more of a trout fisherman and fly fisherman on some of the rivers up here where we don't get salmon runs. So that said, I just didn't know a lot about the issue, but I listened to some friends. And some of them were against this proposal. Some of them were for this proposal. And they both made these super good arguments. But my initial reaction was, man, this proposal is insane. To take 4 dams on the lower Snake River that are hydroelectric dams and blow them out of the water, basically, which is not what's going to happen, by the way. You'll learn that throughout this conversation. And, have to figure out a way to replace that power and replace the shipping methods that the grain farmers and other agricultural industries use to these rivers for, just for a bunch of fish. It seemed insane to me. But as I was asking you when I first started this kind of dialogue, so to speak, is I was open-minded and I kind of hit the brakes as to what I was thinking. And I started thinking about, okay, why is this proposal so crazy? Why does it seem so unrealistic? Let's look at the numbers. And I had people telling me, well, we got to deal with the sea lions instead. Or, well, we got to deal with the tribal netting going on the rivers, on the lower Columbia. Well, we got to deal with ocean conditions and maybe better ladders or more hatcheries. When you kind of shake all that out, the facts do not support those arguments. They simply don't support those arguments. And I'm saying that from a guy who wanted those arguments to support that argument or that theory, so to speak. They just don't. And so what I'm asking you guys to do is when you're listening to this episode, really think about what's being said from a non-emotional place. Don't worry about which friend said this is a terrible idea versus this friend that said this is a great idea. Take all that out of it Instead of hearing one person's opinion, especially, a lot of times you can't really verify where the person's opinion actually came from. How do you know that their opinion isn't held because they heard it from somebody else that they might trust that might be talking out of their ass? They don't know anything about this salmon issue, just like I didn't 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, whatever that was. I didn't know anything about this issue. So I'm asking from, as if we were friends, this would be from a friend. I'm asking, try to be open-minded about it. Instead of bitching on Facebook, what are you doing when we're talking about the grand scheme of anything conservation or wildlife management wise? What are you doing? Are you one of those people that just sits around and bitches on Facebook about what the Fish and Game did? And I don't care what state you're listening to this in. You're bitching about the Fish and Game, they made this decision. You're bitching about the commission for doing that. You're bitching about this. You're bitching about that. I see it all the time. And I do that too. I'm not calling you out on that because I bitch about things too, right? I'm not, that's at no fault of anybody's. It's our natural tendency, especially on a platform like Facebook or Instagram, where there's not really any repercussions as to what can happen by going against somebody you don't even know. So I'm asking in this particular instance and every instance when we're talking about conservation and wildlife management and public lands, what does bitching at people on Facebook accomplish, or Instagram or any social media platform? What does it accomplish? What are you doing outside of just bitching? And you know who you are if you are listening to this. You know who this is targeted at. There's a lot of people that talk a lot on these social media sites, but they do nothing outside of that. What are you doing? Are you doing your own research? Are you genuinely looking at these issues from an open mind and somewhere out of a real curiosity to solve problems and have real solid solutions? Are you doing your own research? Are you putting money into conservation organizations? Are you reading legislative proposals? That's another thing. If you jump on Congressman Simpson's website and you actually look at the proposal, a lot of the things that people, I can always tell when somebody's complaining about this proposal that they haven't even read it. They haven't read it. So make sure you're reading it. Are you reading legislative proposals? Are you writing your legislatures? Are you attending meetings? Are you emailing the fish and game biologists? Have you called a legislative office? Have you volunteered on a conservation committee or some kind of improvement project? Are you serving on a board that has a conservation or public land kind of foundation to it? Are you forming your own nonprofit or other organization? Are you asking the right questions and actually listening to differing opinions? Are you visiting habitat areas in question? And what I mean by that is I've driven the lower Snake River and all the dams recently to kind of learn this on my own. I even drove it on another occasion all the way to Portland on the lower Columbia. Are you asking these questions? Are you looking at this from a non-emotional, fact-based, pragmatic way? Have you tried to sway someone else in a respectful way instead of just some snarky punchline that that supports your opinion, but you're being so disrespectful, everybody just kind of blows it off, because that's what most people do. And it's getting so irritating on Facebook. I got this one friend. I don't know how that guy makes a living. He must post every freaking 10 minutes about the situation in America right now. But what is he doing about it? He's bitching up a storm about this political thing or that political thing, or these city folks moving to his area. But what is he doing right now? I want you guys to think about that. What are you doing? Are you helping with your voice, with your money, or volunteerism, or time, to hunters facing challenges in other states that don't even affect you? Think about that, because when you think they don't affect you, they actually do affect you. I'll give you a great example. I put together a couple of episodes for this show when they were doing I am never going to go bear hunting in California. I mean, never say never, right? But I mean, the chances or the odds of me going to California to hunt bears is slim to none. But I got involved and I helped those hunters in California when that California bear ban came out, because that is important. That is the stuff that will spread to places like Idaho and Colorado and Utah and Wyoming and Montana and Arizona and New Mexico and all these other western states that we all hunt, and Washington and Oregon. All those things. Are you doing anything to help hunters and trappers and outdoorsmen in other states fight these ridiculous anti-hunting or anti-trapping pieces of legislation? I guess lastly, are you realistically and legitimately trying to understand an issue that removes the sometimes popular opinion or peer-pressured opinions while also removing the emotion out of the argument and coming up with your own opinion that is fact-based, non-emotionally based? We're not anti-hunters around here, right? That's what anti-hunters do. They have emotional arguments. So when it comes to this salmon proposal from Congressman Mike Simpson, are you going to be on the same path that like an anti-hunting organization is going to take on this and just come at it from some emotional place? Or are you actually going to look at the facts of what this proposal presents? Because if you do, you're going to be like me. You're going to be somebody that just did like a complete 180, where I thought this proposal was absolute lunacy and unrealistic. And it's going to screw the ratepayers on the benefit from these hydroelectric dams. It's going to screw the farmers who are trying to transport their product. It's going to screw the shipping companies. All this stuff is going to happen. They're just going to blow these dams out of the way, and all the sediment's going to ruin the rest of the river, and all the habitat's not ever going to go back to how it used to be, and we should focus instead on a couple of sea lions in the Columbia River. That's where I went to a point in which I'm at today, where if you take all of those emotional-based arguments out of the equation of this proposal, you will see that actually everything has been thought about, and there is accounting for everything that we argue about with this. And so I've changed my opinion, and I'm in favor of this proposal, and I don't care who knows it. That's all I ask out of you. If you listen to this and you get to the end and you decide that you're still against it, I totally respect that. As long as you had an open mind and you really thought about some of the things that we talk about in this episode, I respect your opinion either way. What I don't respect is people that just get on Facebook without any information, without any personal research, or any freaking clue as to what the facts are on the ground, and start ripping each other apart. That's not the place to do that. It's disrespectful, and it doesn't accomplish anything. We need solutions above and beyond just a salmon proposal. We need so many solutions to so many things that affect hunters and anglers that we need to stop getting on Facebook and providing a bunch of snarky punchlines or platitudes that don't achieve anything. They just don't achieve anything. That's my rant for this week. This here week 2 of April 2021. Without further ado, guys, I'd like to welcome Congressman Mike Simpson to the show. He took time out of his busy schedule to jump on board with me here at the Western Huntsman, and I think we achieved a great deal of fact-finding discussions together, and I think that you guys will get a lot out of this if you're serious about learning about this issue and serious about taking a stand one way or the other. This is a great time to start talking about this proposal and understand it. Just understand it. That's all I ask. Guys, I appreciate you tuning in. It's been a great haul this year so far. We're having a great year in terms of the guests and the episodes and the downloads and everything else that we're just really growing rapidly. I appreciate that. Is thanks to you guys. Thanks to you guys. I appreciate that. Guys, with that said, here's Congressman Mike Simpson. Take care. Guys, on the line today on the Western Huntsman podcast, I have Congressman Simpson of Idaho, and we are going to be talking a lot about the ruckus that has been raised, it seems, lately regarding the salmon proposal, the dam proposal here in Idaho regarding the Lower Snake River dams. We're going to talk a little bit about public land and things of that nature. But before we do that, Congressman Simpson, thanks for coming on the show. Great to have you.
Hey, good to be with you, Jim.
So I am pretty excited about this conversation because we're going to be coming at this from an angle of which, for me geographically where I'm at, I'm north of where this proposal is mainly focused on, and I have not spent a lot of time fishing for salmon and steelhead, and so I guess that's one way of saying I didn't know much about this issue prior to about a month ago. And I think that there's a lot of people in this audience that may not have all the right information or all the facts, and hopefully we have folks join in that are going to have an open mind about this discussion, because there's a lot to it. It's a very complicated issue.
Yes, it is.
And
very complicated.
It is, yeah. And so I'm glad we were able to connect. We had to kind of do this we're doing this over the phone, just so folks know, because the internet was not cooperating with us. So we're doing this the old-fashioned way. So, Congressman, let's start out with just a quick kind of bird's eye view. How long have you been in Congress? And give us a little bit of your background, and then we'll kind of take the conversation from there.
Well, I've been in Congress for this is my 23rd year. My 12th term started this year. Before that, I was in the real world. I was a dentist and grew up in Idaho. Grew up in southeast Idaho in Blackfoot, and now live in Idaho Falls. Then I served a term on the Blackfoot City Council when I started practicing dentistry, and then I served 14 years in the Idaho legislature and was Speaker of the House for the last 6 years, and was actually either going to retire and practice dentistry full time or run for governor. And that's when Dirk Kempthorne decided to come back from the Senate and run for governor, and Mike Crapo moved over to the Senate, and it opened up the congressional seat that I now sit in. And so I decided to run for Congress and have been there ever since.
Wow. So can you still do a root canal?
I don't know that you'd want me in your mouth. I haven't practiced dentistry for 23 years now. I think you'd want me to get my hands back into it before I worked on anybody.
have some guinea pigs before I come over, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, one thing that I will say, Congressman, from our standpoint, I kind of want to start the conversation from this kind of foundation. I am very much a conservative, and I've been very disappointed with how some Republicans behave in terms of public land. And then we have you, who kind of sets yourself apart from maybe going against the grain on that issue. And you kind of headed up the Great American Outdoors Act. That was a big deal. That was a huge win for outdoorsmen and anybody that enjoys public lands. And I appreciate that. I don't get to say that a lot about some of our leadership in coming out of D.C. And so, can you kind of talk about that and what your thoughts on public land are?
Sure. When you live in a state like Idaho, that's 64% federal land, access to those public lands is very important. Most people live in Idaho because we like our environment. We like to go out and recreate or hunt or fish or whatever on our public lands, which means you have to have access to those public lands. The Great American Outdoors Act, which permanently funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund, it does funding to address the backlog in our national parks and historical areas and those types of things. I think is probably the best piece of environmental legislation that's probably passed since the Wilderness Act to preserve our public lands. And as I said, if you don't have access to those public lands, then they're kind of meaningless, if you're a hunter and outdoorsman. So the main focus of the Great American Outdoors Act was actually to increase access and maintain access for people that like to recreate, whether it's just hiking or whether it's hunting or fishing or other snow machining or whatever on our public lands. So I think it was a great piece of legislation. It actually started as a bill that I introduced a few years before it passed, called the Lands Act, and then when the Senate decided to take it up, they actually added a few things to it, made it better than my Lands Act was. But it was the Lands Act that I had introduced was the basis for the Great American Outdoors Act. So I was very proud to be a part of that and making sure that it got passed.
Yeah, and it is a great piece of legislation, so I want to. Why are Republicans, some of our Republican friends out there, that when we're talking on the public lands issue, why do we struggle on this side of the aisle with public land so much? Do you have a take on that, or?
Well, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the former chairman of the Resources Committee, Rob Bishop from Utah, good friend of mine. We used to have discussions about that, and he viewed the Land and Water Conservation Fund is just being able for the federal government to buy more land in the West. And he thought the federal government owned enough land in the West, and in fact thought that the state should own more and the federal government should own less. So he was opposed to the Land and Water Conservation Fund being permanently funded. But when you look at what the Land and Water Conservation Fund does in preserving access, and yes, buying in holdings, that's where they usually purchase land, the federal government. Like we had a $25 million, or I think it was $25 million acreage within Grand Teton National Park that was privately owned. And for the owner, it was either develop it or get rid of it, or sell it to the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which made sense. That's an in-holding. And so that's where most of the Land and Water Conservation Fund goes. When people like Rob complain about the LWCF, I always tell them, come and float the South Fork of the Snake River with me. And you'll go through the canyons here and you'll see what the Land and Water Conservation Fund has done in preserving that canyon so that people can fish there and enjoy it. It's the largest stand of cottonwoods, I think, in the United States. It's beautiful, beautiful territory. If I could, I'd just float it every day. But if that was not there and not preserved, what you'd have is a whole bunch of cabins all the way up and down that canyon, and I know that because I'd own one of them.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's interesting. With, I don't know, on that subject, for me, a guy so I'm in North Idaho, right, and my district representative, frankly, doesn't have my vote because he's not good on public land. And he won't talk about it, and so this is like a straw that broke the camel's back type kind of issue for me, and I only have a few of those, and what makes it super interesting, and with a lot of these folks like Mike Lee and Rob Bishop and Ted Cruz and these individuals that I agree with 98% of the time. It's that 2% on public land that kills it, because for me that's as big of an issue as like the Second Amendment, or other big issues that we enjoy or take advantage of as Americans, that a lot of people, they just drop the ball on this public land issue, and I'm hoping, I feel like there's a shift coming with that, and it's starting to kind of register with some Republican leaders where the public lands issue is a big deal for a lot of Republicans, and a lot of Republicans want nothing to do with the states taking over the land, because that means we don't own it anymore.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I'll relay an interesting conversation I had several years ago, back when Hurricane Katrina hit, and we were looking for the money to pay for Hurricane Katrina and stuff. And one of my Texas colleagues, who was a friend of mine, came up to me and said, "Hey, I know how we can pay for Hurricane Katrina." And I said, "How's that?" And he said, "Let's just sell those public lands in the West." And of course, he comes from Texas that has essentially no public land.
I know, it's like less than 5%.
And so if you want to hunt in Texas, you go out on an organized hunt at a preserve, where they stake out a antelope and say, "There it is, shoot it." It's not like in the West. So I told him, "Listen, you take care of Texas, let us take care of Idaho."
Yeah, well, I appreciate that because and I've said this on the show many times. I do not want to be like Texas, and I love my friends in Texas, and we have a lot of listeners in Texas. So this isn't talking negatively about Texas in any way, other than to say I don't want Idaho to become Texas, where I have to pay thousands of dollars to go deer hunt. That's a big issue. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. It's totally crazy. Yep. So,
the other thing that I get frustrated by is when we have some Texans come up, and this has happened. And again, I love Texas too. I love the representatives from there. They're all good friends. But when we have a couple come up and buy thousands of acres in Idaho and then deny access to people's favorite hunting grounds that used to be able to traverse across that area, and what they don't understand in Idaho, when you deny that access that they've had for years, that doesn't mean that you just go around the property. Sometimes it means you have to go to another state and back across the mountains to your favorite hunting grounds and stuff. You know?
Yeah, either that or a helicopter. I mean, that's been an issue. We've had they cut off the access to the public land, and it's like what's the point of having public land if there's no, like you said earlier, if you can't access it. So major issues. We could have Congressman. We could do like 2 or 3 different podcasts on these topics.
Oh yeah, we sure could.
So for sure, I know we should probably shift gears because the biggest thing that or I guess the reason why I reached out, and I appreciate you agreeing to come on, is this Energy and Salmon Concept. And this is essentially the proposal, and I want to make that distinction. It's important that people understand this is not yet a bill. This is a proposal, and this is going to be essentially based around the lower Snake River dams and breaching those dams in an effort to kind of change the habitat and create better salmon habitat and prevent our salmon from becoming extinct, because that's the trajectory they're on now. Right. Can you give us in a nutshell the concept, the proposal, and how this thing kind of came about?
Sure. As nutshell as I can. It's so complicated that's hard, but I'll try. This started actually trying to help the Bonneville Power Administration that's facing some financial challenges. And one of those is the endless lawsuits that they face every time there's a buy-op or a dam gets relicensed or something like that. There's endless lawsuits, and we spend millions in court instead of out doing the work necessary to restore salmon runs and other things. And so we said, how do you end the lawsuits? Well, you end the lawsuits by doing what's necessary to restore Idaho salmon runs. And right now, they're, as you mentioned, they're on the path to extinction, the 4 Idaho salmon runs. We got the best habitat in the Pacific Northwest in the upper Salmon Valley in the Salmon River and the Stanley Basin and so forth. It is prime habitat for these salmon, and they are the marathoners of all salmon. They travel 900 miles to get to this place and go 1.33 miles in altitude gain as they do that to spawn where they were spawned. So we talked to fish biologists from all over the Pacific Northwest, and 201 that we had talked to, every one of them said the only way you're going to restore Idaho salmon runs is to breach the lower Snake River dams or to bypass the lower Snake River dams. And I will tell you that that's a tough decision to make. It's been suggested before, and in fact, when it was first suggested and I was in the state legislature, I kind of started to laugh because I said, we're not going to do that. So we ought to try everything else first. Well, it's 25 years later, and guess what? We have tried everything else, and the salmon numbers continue to decline. What they tell me is that you've got probably maybe 4 cycles of salmon, which is about 20 years before those runs go extinct. I don't want that to happen. I think we ought to be doing everything we can to restore Idaho salmon and steelhead runs to Idaho. And when I look at the cost of those dams versus the benefits to Idaho, particularly in southern Idaho here, we send 487,000 acre feet of Idaho water down the river every year. That's water that's not available for irrigation, for recharging our aquifer or other things, in order to flush salmon over these dams that are in Washington. Mm-hmm. And the one thing it's not doing is restoring salmon runs. So we pay that cost. Plus, we pay the cost of losing our salmon runs, which are a huge economic and environmental benefit to Idaho. So we decided that the only way you're going to restore those runs is to remove the dams. And if you're going to remove the dams, there's a consequence to that, because those dams have a value. And a large part of this concept that we've come up with is trying to make the stakeholders whole. How do you have a different transportation system to get grain to Portland instead of barging? How do you replace the energy that those dams produce? How do you compensate the people in Washington, the farmers in Washington that pump out of those reservoirs behind those lower Snake River dams. You'd have to give them the resources to be able to reconfigure their pumping to a lower, obviously, Snake River and stuff. So
yeah,
it brings up a lot of issues that need to be addressed, and that's what this concept is about, and why we put it out as a concept, because we need input from people. If we're going to design our own future, or whether it's going to be designed for us, we need input from people on the challenges that this would present and how we would address them. And that's kind of where we are right now, is asking for input from people. And as you would expect, there are the hell no never, we'll never remove those dams people, which I understand. Like I say, 25 years ago, that's where I was. But and then there are some people that are starting to think, well, that Simpson's right about designing the future and looking down the road 25 to 50 years of what do we want the Pacific Northwest to look like and be. And so it's an interesting conversation that's happening right now. Some people ask why I kicked this hornet's nest, and believe me, it is a hornet's nest.
It is, definitely. I mean, just the fallout on social media I've seen has been eye-opening. And so, that said, what you said about, 25 years ago, you laughed at this type of kind of, proposal or whatever.
Right.
I don't know, 4-6 weeks ago when I first saw this thing come out, I was that guy as well. And a lot of this was kind of out of ignorance on my part, because I didn't know a lot about the issue. The more I have spent in terms of, putting my own research into it and knowing what the facts are and knowing what the solutions that have been tried in the past that have failed versus what solutions are left and available and on the table, I have kind of done, and a lot of this is thanks to Brian Brooks over at the Idaho Wildlife Federation. I just didn't know much about the proposal, and just the thought of it seemed crazy to me. Yeah. Now, I'm looking at this, and to me, it's the only viable option. And can you explain? You'd mentioned, why are you kicking the hornet's nest now? Why are you kicking the hornet's nest now? What is significant about the timing of this?
Well, two things. One is that I don't think we have that much longer to do what's necessary to save these salmon. As I said, about 4 cycles, 5 years a cycle salmon. So fish biologists tell me you got about 4 cycles before they go extinct, which is 20 years. Even under our proposal, the dams don't come out till 2030. That would be half that cycle.
Yeah.
So we need to start thinking about it now. Should have been thinking about it 10 years ago. But as you know, those of us in politics are really good about stating a problem and how we want to solve it and all that kind of stuff. But then when you have to make the tough decisions that are challenging and challenge you politically, we're good at walking away from those too.
Yeah.
And the challenge is that there are so many different factors that affect salmon, whether it's ocean conditions that have been changing, and they change every about 30 years, the Pacific decadal oscillation. Salmon runs go down and then they come back up when that oscillation goes south and so forth. Whether it's predators, which we are addressing, whether it's harvest, which we are addressing, all of those types of things. And what I tell people is, listen, if you've got a better way to save salmon, something that hasn't been tried, let me know. Call me and tell me. And that's the challenge. And that's where we were. We were saying, God, there's got to be a way to save these salmon runs without taking these dams out. But alas, we have tried everything. We've had like 25 different collaborative groups over the last 30 or 40 years trying to address this issue, and it just hasn't worked.
Well, and okay, so you're bringing up a lot here, and I want to address a lot of these key points and a lot of these arguments against this proposal, because I think a lot of it is just like I was, a month and a half ago or so. But let's start with, what really started changing my mindset on this was when we look at the tributaries that are kind of below the R4 dams, the lower Snake River dams on the Columbia going out on the Washington, Oregon side. Those 4 dams on that side and the SAR rates, the smolt to adult return on these salmon is, anywhere from 3.5% to 6%, varying, depending on what tributary we're talking about, right?
Right.
It's when they get to Idaho that the smolt to adult return, the SAR rate drops dramatically, and I think it's like below 1%.
It's about 0.8%.
Okay, and so on that topic, just so the audience knows, in order to maintain the current numbers, the population, just to maintain it, am I correct in saying that that's got to be about 2%?
Yep,
and
about 2%.
In order to grow the population, it needs to be above the 2%, ideally between 4 and 6%.
Right.
And that's what they're seeing on the Oregon and Washington side in all those tributaries. Right. However, once you cross over onto the Idaho side on the Lower Snake River, those 4 dams is the only section of these rivers and tributaries that make up the Columbia River Basin that are suffering and below 1%. That is a trajectory towards extinction. And so that's a super significant point that I think a lot of people miss. Go ahead.
It is, and the interesting thing is that as I said, there are so many things that affect salmon runs that it gives everybody the ability to point to something else. No, It's not the dams. It's the ocean conditions. No, it's not the ocean conditions. It's the predators. And so that you can always point to something else, and they do that. And I tell them, listen. Idaho salmon, just like those that go into the John Day drainage or into the Yakima Valley drainage that only pass over the 4 dams on the lower Columbia River, Idaho salmon pass those 4 same dams, and the SARS rate of all of those runs are above what's necessary to maintain the runs. In fact, some of them are very healthy runs. Mm-hmm. Only Idaho salmon have to cross the next 4 dams, and that SARS rate drops to extinction levels, 0.8%. And so that's the only difference Idaho salmon have, is that they have to pass 4 more dams. And frankly, 8 dams is just too many.
Pardon the interruption, but we got to talk about the show sponsors because they're the ones that make this show possible. I want to start with Scree Gear. Scree is extreme mountain gear. It's high-performance hunting attire and gear, scientifically tested camo patterns, and all backed by a great company, and I wouldn't recommend it to you if I didn't fully believe in it. I've run the Scree for a couple of seasons now, and I tell you what, if you want to compare the quality and the durability and the effectiveness of this gear, go for it, because you're going to find that you're not going to drop a fortune and you're still getting all the benefits of what you can see out there in terms of high-end gear. They offer a complete layering system for all terrains, for all conditions. It's gear designed to adapt to the weather. It's rugged. It's backed by a lifetime guarantee and warranty. And what I really like about it is the VIP sizing and exchange program. So basically, if you order the hard scrabble pants and you get them and they show up and they're not fitting right, you just send them right back for free, because they send you the return slip label that you just throw on your packaging and send it back. It doesn't cost you anything, and they replace it with a better size for you. So Scree Gear, check them out. And don't forget, at the checkout, use promo code The Western Huntsman for 15% off and free shipping. Heck of a deal. Great company, great gear. All right, moving on to Tacticam. Guys, Tacticam is our newest sponsor, and I'm really excited about having them on board. If you've ever wanted to film your hunts and have specific and unique, like point of view type kind of angles, the Tacticam is the way to go. It can connect to your bow, it can connect to your rifle. They've got the film through scope. Make sure you're checking regulations on all of that, because that changes in every state. But I film in Idaho when I'm hunting, and I have the Tacticam attached both to a head harness and a shoulder harness, as well as like this flex mount thing, so I can get multiple angles as I'm calling in a screaming bull elk and get it all on camera. The gear is great, and they also have other cool packages like the Reveal game camera. It's a cell cam, so you can set that up if you're managing whitetail property or something like that. It's perfect because it texts you in real time when pictures are coming in. The other thing that I really like from Tacticam is their new fisheye camera. For you fishermen out there, when you're trying to get that perfect coverage of filming your fishing trip, man, this thing is badass. It gets the whole wide angle of it, and you can control all of these cameras through an app on your phone in real time. Zoom in, hit record, zoom out, pause it, stop it, all the things right there in your app in real time. Great sound quality, 4K video recording, get you a Tacticam. And I heard a rumor that we're going to have one hell of a giveaway coming up on the show for some Tacticam gear, so stay tuned for that. Go to tacticam.com and check it out. Last, but certainly not least, I want to talk about Hoffman boots. Hoffman boots are high-quality, high-end, great traction, rugged mountain boots that you need. Every hunter needs a good set of boots. And you could really drop a fortune on great boots, but the Hoffmans are going to give you everything that you can get, just like when I was talking about with Spree Gear, without breaking the bank. That's what I love about the Hoffmans. If there's one thing you don't want to chintz out on, it's great quality hunting boots. You've seen them. They've been up there hunting, people that chintz out on their hunting boots, and they're slipping and sliding all the way down the mountain. The sole's coming off. They've got everything. Their feet are soaked. All that is going to be prevented with a great pair of Hoffmans. I run the Hoffman 8-inch Explorers. It's a great boot, and I could personally vouch for that. But they've also got another great product called the Summit. And that's another popular boot out there. Got the Explorers in insulated, non-insulated, 6-inch, 8-inch, and just check out Hoffman.com, and you can, Hoffmanboots.com, and you will be able to kind of pick out all the different options and things like that. They've got a great warranty, great company. Jim Hoffman, the owner, is a great dude. And at checkout, don't forget to use promo code Huntsman10, all caps lock, for 10% off. Enjoy it. Let's get back to the show. And so, and that eliminates the argument that, one of the arguments I've heard is, well, the sea lions are eating all the fish, and that's why they're not. Well, if that were the case, why are they so healthy on the Washington, Oregon side, and not so much on the Idaho side? And so, can I bring up some of those arguments, and we could talk about those kind of as I've heard those?
Sure.
You mentioned ocean harvest and ocean conditions. A lot of folks, they're going to respond, well, we need to deal with the ocean conditions first and the ocean harvest numbers first. How do you respond to that?
Ocean harvest is something that has to be taken into consideration, and you have to look at what the treaties are with Canada and with other foreign nations and stuff, and we need to enforce those treaties, frankly. The problem is that when salmon come into the Columbia River, you don't know if they're salmon bound for Idaho, or whether they're salmon bound for the John Day drainage, or they're salmon bound for the Yakima drainage. Mm-hmm. They're just salmon that enter the river. And but we have to do a better job of enforcing our treaty negotiations with Canada and with other foreign nations that fish offshore and stuff. And I know that's something that we continue to work on and do a better job than we have in the past, but we could still do a better job. Okay, the next one would be sea lions and other predators. Taking out large numbers. I have the stat on that. Well, what's your answer to that? Well, the sea lions, they don't just attack Idaho salmon; they attack all salmon. They don't discriminate against the Idahoans. No, they don't know one salmon from another, but they just eat them. And we have put in place some predator control. We're actually killing off some of the predators in the mouth of the Columbia, the sea lions. We need to do more with the terns that eat the smolts as they go down and out to the ocean and stuff. And we could do that, and probably will do that, and should. The other challenge is that you have with those dams in place. It's almost a misnomer to call the Lower Snake River a river, because what it is a series of pools behind these dams. And that slows the salmon smolts from getting to the ocean. It takes about 3 times as long for a smolt to get to the ocean today as it used to without those dams. Mm-hmm. And that means they're in warmer waters, in waters that don't have the current to flush them like the open river does. So they're more susceptible to predators within those pools of water, and there are other fish that eat these smolts and stuff. So we've made them much more susceptible to predators, and as I said, warmer waters, and the fact that it takes so long to get to the ocean that is just damage to them. So all of those things are factors. But the only way you're going to speed up the rate of return of the smolts going to the ocean, or the downward passage of the smolts going to the ocean, is to remove those lower snake dams.
So what about one of the big arguments I've heard is, back in 2012, 2013, we had these great salmon runs despite all these issues with the dams. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Salmon runs go up and down. No doubt about it. And the problem is if you look at the trajectory of Idaho salmon runs are headed toward the ditch. They're going toward extinction. I don't think there's anybody that doubts that. If you look at as we talked about, the SARS rate and other things, and that's how you measure a healthy run. And some people will say, well, you know what? Even rivers that don't have dams on them, like the Fraser River right now in British Columbia, their salmon runs are down. That's absolutely true. The difference is their salmon runs fall from a level that is substantial to one that is still healthy, but they're down. Ours on the Salmon River or on the Snake River salmon, when our levels fall, they go from a level that is unsustainable to one that is almost extinction level, and that's what's happening now. But that decadal oscillation in the ocean, that comes about every 30 years, and warm water comes up from the equator, and there's more competitors for food, and there's less food for the salmon and so forth. But that reverses itself, and it goes back south again, and salmon runs come back. So, the argument that, there's even down salmon runs on rivers that don't have any dams is not an argument that's sustainable.
Mm-hmm. What is, and I agree that because the facts actually back that up, and I'm trying to pull up the stat I had, but when we're talking about the arguments that I'm making here, and this is just basically based on what I've seen people making arguments on, right?
Sure.
We've got this myriad of ideas. It's the ocean conditions, it's the sea lions, it's tribal netting, it's the fish ladders maybe need to be improved, or we're not doing enough hatchery production. All these things that we're talking about, do you know off the top of your head, when you combine all those issues outside of the dam issue, is there a number or a percentage of what is affecting our salmon return?
Let's talk first about hatcheries. All the time we were putting these dams in, everybody said, don't worry about salmon runs because we'll just do hatchery fish. What we find out is hatchery fish are not really the replacement for wild salmon. First of all, they're raised in more confined conditions, more disease, that type of stuff, and they'll transmit that disease to wild salmon, which is damaging to wild salmon runs. Mm-hmm. Salmon hatcheries are not the answer to save Idaho's wild salmon runs. What was some of the other?
We have the fish ladders. I've heard that argument. Well, why can't we make better fish ladders?
The fish ladders we have today are better than they used to be. The turbines we have in the dams are better than they used to be. It used to be we lost about 15% of the smolts going down the river in the turbines and stuff. And that's, as they tell me, it's probably 5 to 7% we lose now. But that's 5 to 7% at every dam. Mm-hmm. So by the time you pass 8 dams, that's a huge number of salmon that have been affected,
Yeah, exactly. Tribal netting, what about that?
The excuse since the 1800s, when we worried about dams, was the tribes. They take too many, they sell them out of pickups in the back of, all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. When you look at the history of it, the people who respect these salmon more than anybody are Native American tribes. This is part of their culture, their history, their religion. They want to save these salmon runs more than anybody else, and they have substantially reduced their take of salmon in order to help try to preserve them. In fact, they are entitled by a court decision that was early 1900s or so to half of the production of the salmon. They're entitled to half of that, and they don't take anywhere near that amount. And the argument about tribes is just one that has been a false argument for years.
One important point that I kind of want to make, because I kind of want to transition into some of the other factors that the implications of removing the dams, breaching the dams, which by the way, we're not talking about removing the physical concrete dam portions, right? I mean, we're just talking about. Yeah. But before we go there, as I've gone through this research, and I've been studying this like crazy, and we're talking about things like the netting and the sea lions and the other predation, and even some of the hatchery productions and water conditions in the ocean and all these things, all those account for a very small portion of the effect to Idaho salmon, right?
Yep. Yep.
And you have
to remember that all of those conditions affect not just Idaho salmon, but all of the salmon runs.
Yes.
And yet the other salmon runs that as we talked about earlier, that just go over the lower 4 Columbia dams are doing fine.
Exactly.
It's the ones that are coming to Idaho that are not.
And that's the point I was making. When you look at the Yakima River wild stillhead, 2002 to 2016, they're at a SAR rate of 4.0. Wild Chinook, 2.5%. John Day, 5.0%. Wild Chinook is 3.6%. The Duchades, 5.0%. And then you come over to the Idaho side, Snake River, the stillhead is 1.4%, which is not sustainable, and the Chinook is 0.7%, which is going to be essentially both of those are extinction level rates. So those stats, those facts right there are what took me from this proposal is crazy to this proposal is what needs to happen, because I liked what you said. I listened to well, in full disclosure, I didn't finish it yet, but I did listen to your interview with Steve on the Meat Eater. And one of the things that was I guess it doesn't get brought up enough, but what are the implications if we don't do anything? Meaning, how will this play out in your mind in the future if we do nothing right now?
If we do nothing right now, it will be done for us at some point in time. The Endangered Species Act pretty much trumps everything else, and I understand why that is. It's because once a species goes extinct, there's only God can recover it, and so a judge is very insistent that you do everything you can to prevent that extinction, and so I'm worried about what a judge's decision will do. Now it is, and this is. In some controversy, whether it's true or not, that only Congress can order the removal of a dam, that a judge can't do it. Some people have said, well, that's not necessarily true, but I don't know. But what a judge can do is make it so expensive to keep the dams by ordering additional spills, by ordering drawdowns and those types of things, that you just look at it and go, this doesn't make sense to keep these dams here. And I'm afraid that's what a judge is going to do. 2 years ago, the judge ordered an additional 40,000 acre feet of water be spilled. That's water that ultimately came out of Idaho, because that's where all the water that goes over these dams comes from. That was 40,000 acre feet. That was $40 million that cost the BPA in lost production. That's $40 million that BPA ratepayers paid, all to flush smolt over these dams, in addition to the 487,000 acre feet we send down there now. So I don't know what a judge is going to decide, but I would rather have us determine what our future is going to be, rather than have a judge decide it. And believe me, a judge can decide it for us.
Yep. I definitely agree with that. Okay. So let's transition to some of the implications here, because I know that's what's creating a lot of the fuss about this. Sure. We're talking about shipping on the rivers now, the grain. How are we going to ship the grain? What about replacing power and all these things that are factors, and some of these are very emotionally based.
Yes,
we're talking about how it's going to affect the Idaho ag industry and the everything that's involved in this. So I want to kind of go through those like we did with some of the issues on with the salmon.
Sure.
Industry wise, what from my perspective, what this would affect is agriculture, the power, shipping, and recreation. Am I missing anything, do you think?
No, I think that pretty much covers them.
Okay.
Which one do you want to talk about first?
Well, let's start with I think a sensitive aspect of this is going to be our agriculture, because and from my perspective, I always feel like our ag folks are always just getting hammered and railed by this legislation or that legislation, and there's a lot of decisions that are made that affect them without much thought put into them. And I feel like in this case, with this proposal, there was a lot of thought put into the agricultural part, but people aren't seeing that. So can we talk about the ag front?
Sure. Over the years, my 23 years in Congress, I have been probably the number one supporter of agriculture and trying to make sure they're sustainable and healthy into the future. And if I thought for a second that this would hurt Idaho agriculture, I would drop it in a heartbeat.
And I would vouch for that because I've heard that you are referred to as the ag guy in Congress.
Well, it's obviously an important industry in Idaho. And I've got a great many friends in the agricultural industry, but removing the dams, you remove the barging capabilities. That's the cheapest way to get grain, particularly from the Palouse. Down here in southern Idaho, most of our grain goes down to Ogden and is gone by truck and stuff. We don't really send grain up to Lewiston to be barged. But in the Palouse area, that's all dry farm, and so water is not that important issue to them, except for that falls from the sky. And so pumping rates is not, and electrical rates is not that big of an issue to them. It's getting the grain to Portland. Barging is the cheapest way to do it. I refuse to believe that we can't find another way to get grain to Portland, that we're not smart enough to figure this out. And what we do in our proposal, and this is just a concept that we came up with, is you put $3.6 billion into a trust fund that's administered by the Departments of Agriculture in Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, and overseen by a board of producers, and you subsidize grain shipments to Portland. And people say, well, we don't want to be subsidizing grain shipments, but you know what? Barging is being subsidized today also.
Because aren't the dams subsidized as well?
Sure.
Yeah.
We appropriate money every year for their operations in the Army Corps of Engineers budget. I know because I'm on the subcommittee and was chairman of it when we were in the majority that does that. So it's subsidized today, but we can shift. We can find alternative ways to do that. But change is difficult, and I understand that for the people in the Pacific Northwest, in particularly in North Idaho and on the Palouse. But if we sit down and put our heads together, we can figure this out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've heard somebody, so I don't know if it was you or somebody else was saying, this is the country that, we won World War II, we put a man on the moon. I mean, why can't we save these salmon without taking a huge hit to our industries that support it? So I want to go back to the subsidies thing, because I know that that's a big issue where it's like, oh, well, we're going to add this subsidy to this industry kind of thing. But we currently subsidize the dams. And so essentially that subsidy would end and it would transfer to the agricultural industry. I'm kind of going blank here.
into the transportation of agricultural products.
Transportation into agricultural products. So it's kind of a moot point in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah. We can find a different way to do it. There's no doubt about it. We're smart enough to do that. We put a man on the moon. We can certainly figure out how to get grain to Portland. And per individual producer, I think we can actually get it to Portland cheaper than it is today.
Yeah, on that topic, when we're talking about shipping down the Columbia, I know that overall the shipping has dropped somewhere in the neighborhood of like 75%, and the grain is like the only thing still being shipped in any kind of mass scale. Is that correct?
Yeah, grain is the primary shipping commodity. There are some fertilizers and a few other things that come up the river and stuff, but grain is they ship 95 million bushels of grain down the river by barge every year. That's a substantial amount. You'd be putting trucks or trains on the tracks or on the roads to replace that, and consequently, you would have to make sure that you had the infrastructure for those rails or on those roads to ship the grain by those means. Some people have suggested, well, you're going to, the carbon footprint that you're going to increase with trucks or trains on the road rather than barges that put very little carbon into the air is just too much, But I will tell you, in the people that I've talked to over the next 10 years, 15 years, what's going to happen in battery technology and so forth, I'm not sure you're going to see a lot of diesel trucks on the road anymore.
Well,
The problem right now is that the initial cost of a truck is so expensive that it's prohibitive for people to get into it. But even with that, the lifespan of a truck using batteries is actually about the operational cost, about 50% of what it costs a diesel today. And as I talk to the battery people, they tell me that it's amazing what's going to happen over the next 10 years.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't really put that one together. Isn't shipping by rail like the most environmentally friendly way to ship products, or am I off base with that?
Well, barging is probably cheaper and more environmentally friendly than shipping by rail, if you don't count the fact that barging kills all our salmon.
Yeah. Well, and it would continue from Lewiston on down, wouldn't it? The shipping on the river.
Yes, the shipping on the river from the Tri-Cities to Portland would still continue.
Okay.
In fact, we can put more. We have a plan actually for the bargers, increases their traffic from the Tri-Cities to Portland above what they're shipping now. So again, I got to tell you, American people are smart enough to figure this out.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. Let's talk about the power part, the aspect of the hydro dams, that how much power they generate and how that is replaced without costing, how much power is costing Idahoans. Power utility costs are just always going up, it seems like. And so, but when we're looking at this, I think that's one of the main reactions is, well, what's my power bill going to look like if we get rid of the hydroelectric on these dams?
And that's a concern of a lot of the rural electrics that use Bonneville Power Administration. But, as I said earlier in the program, Idaho gets about 8% of the power produced by those dams. Not a large percentage of that power. Most of it goes to the state of Washington, to their PUDs and other organizations and stuff. So if you're going to remove those dams, that's potentially 3,000 megawatts of power that they produce. Normally, it's about 15 to 1,800 megawatts that they produce, but they have the capacity for 3,000. So you're going to have to replace that. And it's going to have to be with firm power. That's power that you can ramp up and ramp down as the demand is there. And you can do that with dams. And hydropower is clean energy. There's no doubt about it. You're going to have to replace it with other forms of clean energy. People say, well, wind and solar isn't going to cover it. That's not what I'm talking about. Small modular reactors. In fact, they just awarded a contract to the Tri-Cities, to the Hanford Reservation, to work on X Generation's new project of a power plant, nuclear power plant that produces 300 megawatts of power. So I've suggested you put small modular reactors, put a 6-pack of them at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation today, and you could replace the power of those dams. But there are other alternatives even to that.
The 4 dams or all 8 dams?
All 4 dams.
Okay, on the lower side.
Yeah, and what you do, or there's also things like pump storage. You saw what happened in Texas with wind and solar, and that's another story we could talk about. But
yes, it is.
Even Elon Musk is going down to southern Texas, to Houston, and they're looking at a battery park. And he tells us that the technology in batteries, the challenge right now is that you can only store power that's produced by wind and solar for about 4 hours. He said that's going to increase many-fold with the technology that's coming out. So you're going to see more battery parks and things like that. And guess which laboratory does the most research on battery technologies? The lead laboratory, PNNL at Hanford. So it's all set up right together there to be able to replace this power, but it does take some money. And what we do is give the Bonneville Power Administration $10 billion for power replacement, whether it's through SMRs, whether it's through pump storage or any other facility. But that brings up one other interesting thing. And when you say the power of all 8 dams and so forth, the question is, how do you end the lawsuits? That's one of the primary factors that I'm focused on, because we spend way too much money in court instead of improving habitat and other conditions that we can get the salmon back. And you do that by saying, okay, you're going to take out these lower 4 Snake River dams, but you're going to relicense all of the dams in the Pacific Northwest that produce more than 5 megawatts of power for a 35 to 50 year period, depending on when their license comes due. That means they would not be subject to lawsuits under the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, and the NEPA process. And I'll tell you, when I talk to power companies about that, they drool. That because they know that when a license comes up, it takes forever and costs hundreds of millions of dollars. And in fact, the example I use is the Hells Canyon complex that Idaho Power has been trying to relicense for the last 25 years. It's cost them 3 times as much money to relicense those dams as it did to build the dams, and it still hasn't been. They still haven't been relicensed after 25 years.
And that's because they're caught up in lawsuits?
Yeah.
Huh,
lawsuits and demands from federal agencies to do this and that and other things. A lot of federal agencies look at it as their cash cow. Well, we could get a park built down here. Okay, we'll go along with it if you'll build us this park or these boat ramps or the other things that federal agencies ask for when they do a relicensing. And it's devastating because guess who pays those costs? It's the ratepayers.
Yep. Are the environmental groups, are they on board with this, do you think, or where are they at with this?
Well, there's a letter just came out from 17 environmental groups. I call them the extreme environmental groups over in Washington and Oregon opposed to this.
Yeah.
And the reason they're opposed to it, they want the dams removed, they want salmon returned, but they don't like losing their ability to sue, which kind of gives you their game plan for the future, is that they want to continue these lawsuits because they make money off of them, frankly. Under the EJA process, Equal Access to Justice Act, that pays them if they win a lawsuit in part or in whole, their attorney's fees are paid for and their court costs are paid for and so forth. It's actually a cottage industry that's been created. But I will tell you, most of the mainstream environmental groups are supportive of what we're trying to do.
Those extreme groups just really rub me the wrong way because they present themselves as these friends to the environment and the fish and the salmon and the habitat and everything else, but they're more detrimental than they are good for everything that they're talking about because of these lawsuits. Like you said, it's like a cottage industry. They just make so much dang money off it.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true.
Don't take me down that path, Congressman. We'll be on here for a long time. The one thing I want to talk about real quick, I didn't cover this, is there's a lot of concern about the sediment. Once the dams are breached and all the sediment, I know there's money basically planned or budgeted for the removal of the sediment. And can you talk about the sediment removal and if that will have negative environmental impacts downriver? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's going to be some sediment that goes downriver, but as I said, we've put in resources to do the dredging behind each of the dams before it would be breached to remove as much of the sediment as you can. You're not going to get 100% of it. Some of it's going to go down to the John Day Dam. You're going to have to remove sediment down there also. So that's a challenge, but it's amazing how fast, when we've looked at other places that have removed dams, how quickly that sediment washes out and stuff. In fact, some people say that at the Elway River in Washington, where they removed the major dam there and salmon came back in a heartbeat, that the sediment actually made kind of a area where salmon are spawning out in the ocean and stuff. So it's, but we're cognizant of the fact that there is environmental impacts of removing these dams, and we have to deal with that and dredge as much of the sediment as you can out of there, and you can remove most of it.
Yeah, and one note I want to make on that is the difference with your proposal and what's kind of taken place in the past is you've essentially thought of all the implications here. You've thought about the repercussions of breaching these dams, and you've got solutions accounted for. A lot of the flack that I'm seeing being thrown around on social media and stuff, I just want to respond and say, have you actually read the proposal? Have you actually gone through and read the proposal? Because it talks about all this. And a lot of people are not going to do that. And so I figured it'd be good to get you on the podcast because, it's a lot of this information is there on your website, which, by the way, folks, if you're listening, if you go to simpson.house.gov and click on the Energy and Salmon Concept, the proposal is right there. The concept, how it's funded, myths and facts, which that's a huge part of that because there are a lot of myths going around regarding the proposal. So do you want to add to that?
Well, proposals in the past, and we've had like 25 different collaborative efforts over the years, looking at how to save salmon runs, and they all come down. What's happened is, they all say, "Well, let's improve the habitat." Okay, everybody can agree with that. Let's do this. Let's do that. All of the things that are relatively easy, and then it comes down to the issue of dams, and it just all breaks apart. Uh, I saw that Senator Cantwell said, well, maybe in this infrastructure package, we could put some money into improving habitat. Well, you know what? The best habitat these salmon have is in Idaho right now. But the reality is, if salmon can't get to it, it doesn't really mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
So we have tried to think of things, but proposals in the past of removing dams have just been, let's just take the dams out. Well, we're the first ones to actually say, wait a minute, those dams have a value. And they have stakeholders, they have communities that have been built up around them and so forth. And they have interests that are beyond just those local interests. So we have to take all of that into consideration. But people are so firmly set to start with that it's hard for them to get past just dam removal and say, okay, if you're gonna take the dams out, then how are you going to deal with all these issues? And that's what we've tried to do in this. And that's why we put it out, as I said, as a concept for people to listen to think about, what I say is put down the pitchforks and let's talk about this. I'm sure there are things that we haven't thought about that will come out as we hold more and more hearings around the state and around my district. I think I held about 12 meetings last week with county commissioners, and public was invited to those and so forth, just to discuss the concept. But as people learn more about it, there will be things and different ideas that people have that we'll take into consideration as we're doing that. And then when we finally decide that we want to write a bill, it is going to take a while to write that bill because it is very complex, as we've learned in this discussion.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure, and it's a huge expense as well. I mean that's also, I think, on the minds of everybody. It's a taxpayer expense.
Yeah.
When we're talking about, we're breaching the dams, right? And the rivers get flowing again, the water cools down, the habitat becomes more sustainable for our wild salmon. They start coming back. That's great. What other benefits, if there are any, are there to this? Are there benefits to industry? Are there benefits to, obviously there's going to be recreational benefits and also outfitter benefits, I'm sure.
Sure.
Is there anything I'm missing there? What else could we expect to see come out of the removal?
Well, the exciting part to me would be to end these lawsuits. Every power company in the United States or every power company in the Pacific Northwest that has a dam that needs to be relicensed is just dreading that day when it has to come up for relicensing. As I said earlier, those costs are going to ultimately be shared by the ratepayers. So it is time to end these lawsuits, which would benefit the communities greatly. The other thing we've done in this proposal is put a fund in for watershed partnerships in the different regions, all the way up to the Puget Sound, where if and what it would be is that, say, the Middle Snake down here, which has issues with water quality because of confined feeding operations, large dairy herds, and runoffs that go into the Snake River, and we have phosphate and nitrate issues and stuff. But if a group and these would have to determine this in the legislation, who would be the organizing body behind a watershed partnership program, that they came up with a proposal that, this is how you're going to handle these issues and that kind of stuff. If a farmer voluntarily decided to join them, they would be exempt from the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act for a period of 25 years as that watershed project, as long as they're following the rules that they've established and it's cleaning up the water. And that same type of availability of watershed partnerships would be available in the Willamette Valley, in the Yakima Valley, and other places too. So we put resources in there for that, trying to make sure that farmers in the region can get that safety and security that they need to move forward. Otherwise, they're going to be facing lawsuits as they are now, particularly in southern Idaho, over water quality.
So I know I'm keeping you a while here, Congressman. I appreciate this again, but kind of in a nutshell, when we're looking at this proposal, we've got currently most wildlife biologists agree that the dams are what is going to create wild salmon extinction in Idaho, correct? Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, and so with this proposal, this would be, this is not like we're talking about going in next week and removing these dams. The first two dams would come out or be breached in 2030, and then the next two dams would be breached in 2031. And by breached, we mean the concrete section of these dams would remain in place so that in the future, were this to turn out maybe badly, those could be reconstructed fairly easily. Is that a fair statement?
Right. You would remove the earthen berms on the sides of the dams, and divert the river around them.
Prior to that taking place, power replacement would be in place. Is that fair?
Yes.
A statement. Okay.
Before you lost the power from these 4 dams, you would have to have the firm power in place to do that.
And then also the infrastructure to make sure that our ag industry isn't suffering in terms of shipping. That would be in place prior.
Yes.
And is there any detrimental habitat issues besides some various sediment that would be going down stream that would be beyond that, more impactful to the landscape that we would need to worry about?
Nobody has brought that up. Nobody has suggested that there is. So I can't think of any, to tell you the truth.
And so basically what would happen at that point is our wild salmon would only have to traverse up 4 dams on the lower Columbia. And once they hit Idaho, it's going to open up a lot of the tributaries that maybe haven't seen salmon in a lot of years. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and I've seen substantially reduced salmon. I go up to Marsh Creek, which is in the Stanley Basin, which is some of the purest, cleanest habitat for salmon that there is. And if we're lucky, we'll find 1 or 2.
Congressman, don't give away your fishing spots on a show like this.
These aren't fishing. You can't fish for these. These are spawning salmon. But it's where you used to see mini salmon, today it's just, you're lucky if you find a couple.
So with all that being said, it is safe to say that this is a pretty solid bet that this would recover our wild salmon in the state of Idaho with little impact to industry and little impact to ratepayers for power. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is.
I know a lot of this sounds redundant, but I'm trying to create this foundation for this discussion. Now, obviously, this is going to cost a lot of money. Can you talk about the budget for just a second and talk about where that money comes from and why it makes sense in your mind?
Well, it would cost we've got the cost estimate right now is about $33.5 billion. That's B with a billion with a B. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, that's a substantial amount of money. If you look at what's being proposed right now in Congress as an infrastructure package, about $2.25 trillion. That's an enormous amount of money. If we were able to get the $33.5 billion in just put it in a Columbia Basin initiative that could only be spent once you pass legislation to do this, because we'd have to pass the legislation after that, and that's going to take some time. But that would be about 1.5% of all the total that they're talking about doing right now. They're going to spend this $2 trillion. I mean, that's going to pass Congress. So should the Pacific Northwest and Idaho get some of those resources to address the needs that we have in designing our own future? I think yes. So that's what we would look at in trying to get those resources to do this. But, that's what it reflects. The cost of it reflects the value of those dams. We're not trying to say that these are, you can just take them out and there's no consequences.
Okay. I like that answer. Okay. So we've got the $33 billion. We've got all the repercussions of removing the dams kind of addressed within the proposal. We've got the science that backs this up. We've got the industry side, speaking of shipping and grain and agriculture and rail and power, and to include recreation, all kind of covered within the proposal. As it stands right now, for me, I have gone from completely against it to I am for this proposal, and I would be willing to do.
Jim, did I lose you?
Oh, did I lose you? Are you there?
You said as it stands right now, and then I lost you.
Oh, okay. I'll repeat it. So as it stands right now, I have gone from completely against this proposal to all for it. And so I guess my question would be at this point is, what is the next step and where are we at with everything?
Well, to convince another 1.5 million people like you have been convinced. No.
And I'm a tough nut to crack. I mean, I'm kind of a stubborn old bugger. So if you can convince me, I feel like it's pretty easy.
Well, you get if you can sit down and talk to people in small groups or individually, you find that a lot of them are more receptive to this than one might think. And there's a lot of people out there that have talked to me that are think this is the way to head, but they're not really sure they want to be public about it because of some of the opposition and stuff.
Yeah,
and
I was like that for a minute.
Well, it's going to take time and many discussions with people, and I'm willing to do that. I'm going to be in North Idaho. I'm going to be in Washington. I'm going to be in Oregon, and obviously in my district in Southern Idaho, trying to tell people what this is about. And all I'm asking is people, let's sit down the pitchforks and let's talk about our future. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we'll be able to convince enough people that this makes sense, or something like this makes sense. Because I won't suggest that we've thought of everything. Some people have brought up ideas that, we just kind of went, wow, we never thought about that. We better take it into consideration, whatever they were talking about. So this is a learning process for all of us, but this is a discussion that frankly had to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. On that note, what you were talking about let me ask you this way. Since the proposal has been made public to today, have you noticed any kind of shift in the perspectives or the way people react to it, whether it's on social media or in person at a question and answer kind of event? What's taken place?
Well, it is. I think there has been a shift. I think there was that initial reaction from almost everybody, except for the people that we had been working with, that said, "Oh, that's crazy. We'll never do that," and stuff. And I think I'm starting to see more people step back and say, "Well, wait a minute. Maybe we ought to consider this," And a lot of them are saying, "I'm not sure I agree with dam removal yet, but I admire you for taking on this challenge because this is an issue that needs to be addressed." So, And what I say to them is, okay, if you don't want to remove the dams, if you don't think that's the right answer, give me your alternative. That's all I ask,
So who benefits, wild salmon aside, who benefits the most in Idaho for removing these dams?
I actually think it's agriculture. Okay. They receive certainty and security that they need for a future. And not have to worry about the lawsuits, the endless lawsuits that come down about water quality and so forth. And we can actually clean up the waters, and we can improve water quantity. We can do a lot of things if we're willing to step back from what we currently do. But I have not heard one person say, "I don't want salmon recovered. Let's just call in the God Squad and they're extinct,"
Yeah, I haven't either.
Everybody says, "Hey, I want salmon recovered as much as anybody does." But generally what that means for a lot of people is, I want salmon recovered as long as I don't have to change anything I'm doing. But change is difficult for people. Boy, I understand that. Mm-hmm. But I want people to step back and say, okay, how can we do this differently?
I want to hammer home one point you just made there, that going back to the agricultural or the ag that are going to benefit the most from this, because I think I want to make sure that point isn't missed, because as it stands right now with the environmental lawsuits out there and the way that shipping is right now, a judge can essentially put a stop to that shipping, whether temporarily or permanently, out of the blue, leaving these farmers essentially with no other option immediately, right?
Yep, that's absolutely true.
And where with this, that removes that risk out of being a farmer and moving grain in the state of Idaho. And that was a huge factor for me when I was looking at this. I'm not a farmer, but I'm sensitive to farmers and farmers' issues because my family is involved in that. So that's a sensitive topic for me, and that was one of those things that really shifted my mindset, as well as some of the other points that you've made here. But I just want to make sure that point is hammered home. This actually protects agricultural more than it would negatively impact it in any way. And that's a big deal. Okay, imagine being a farmer, waking up on a Wednesday morning, and all of a sudden, bam, you just find out a federal judge has shut down shipping on the Columbia River because of an environmental lawsuit. How are you moving that product?
Exactly. And I find it interesting that just this last week I read a press release from the Columbia Snake River Irrigators Association. And those are people that pump out of the pools down at by Ice Harbor and so forth. And they said, listen, in their press release, we have always been adamantly opposed to dam removal and so forth and so on. The circumstances are changing, and a judge can impose, X, Y, and Z and that kind of stuff. And they said, we better be a part of this discussion of our future rather than just let it happen to us. So even they're starting to see the need to address this issue.
That's huge.
Yeah, huge when I read it, yeah.
So I asked you the one way. Let me ask you this way. Who benefits the most by doing nothing with these dams?
I don't think anybody benefits. I cannot find anybody that would benefit from this.
I would challenge you on that, Congressman. I would challenge you on that. I would say that the extreme environmental groups would benefit by doing nothing.
Yeah, that might be true because they're going to continue the lawsuits, and that's going to be their income,
Mm-hmm. Because they're the ones that make the most ruckus, but do the least for our wildlife and conservation and public lands and everything else. That hunters and anglers are the people that actually put their teeth into these issues, and we actually get things done. And so that to me, clearly, if you can't pick up on my voice, I have some disdain for extreme left-wing environmental wackos.
You and me both.
Okay, good.
And I've always said, and farmers get attacked by them all the time, and I will tell you that the best environmentalists in this country are farmers, because they know the value of that land, and they know that if they destroy that land, there goes their industry. It's like me being a dentist, not taking care of my hand drill.
Yeah,
that's how I make my living. Farmers make their living off the land. They care about this land and making sure that it's maintained healthily, in a healthy way. Are there occasionally a bad farmer? Yeah, there's a guy that overgrazes or something like that. But as a whole, the best environmentalists in this country actually are the agricultural industry.
Man, I'll be honest with you. I kind of cringed when you talked about your hand drill I just had a root canal like 3 weeks ago, and it was actually for what it was a good experience, but I just never want to be tortured in a dental chair again.
Well, we call it endodontics. The word root canal is kind of scary all in itself.
Did you know that they were doing root canals in ancient Egypt?
Yeah.
I didn't know that, because I asked the dentist when I was there. I was like, how did this happen back in, let's say, Egyptian times, or back in before they had Novocaine? What happened here? I mean, did people just die from the infection or what? And he gave me the whole history on it. It was really interesting.
You know how they used to deaden the nerve when they would be working on a tooth like that? I mean, this is like in the 1800s.
How?
They would put arsenic in it.
Oh, wow. No way.
A pellet with arsenic on it.
Oh,
then we found arsenic's not all that good for you.
It's crazy.
Yeah, we've come a long ways.
We have come a long ways, for sure. We've come a long ways, and I feel like, there's a lot of things going on in this country right now that disappoint me. But I still feel like we are the United States of America, and this is still Idaho, and we can still go a long ways from this point forward. But we have work to do, and so
yep, we do.
I really appreciate the conversation. I got a lot out of this. I feel like my audience is going to get a lot out of this. I appreciate. I know I've taken over an hour here, so we better wrap this up. But thanks a bunch for coming on. Any closing thoughts that you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I would. Jim, I don't know how old you are. I'm getting up there.
I'm 40.
Okay, you'll be around for a while. But, we're really not doing this for us. We're doing it for your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids. I want them to have the same experiences, be able to enjoy the Idaho that we've all been able to enjoy over the years, and the great outdoors that we have here, and the reason that we live in Idaho. And we can do it. We can do it without destroying our economy, without putting anybody under hardship. We just have to think about the future a little bit. And I think most Idahoans, when they step back, they want that same thing for their kids too.
Yeah, I agree. That's great. I've never thought of it that way. Great.
Yeah.
Well, Congressman, thanks a bunch for coming on. This has been great. And personally, thank you for what you've done with public lands and the Great American Outdoors Act and this proposal. You opened my eyes to a lot of this just by presenting this proposal. It just wasn't something I put a lot of thought into. So if you'd asked me 6 weeks ago to carry on a conversation for an hour about wild salmon on the lower Snake River, I would have been like, no way. So I don't know. So
well, you've learned a lot in that 6 weeks then, because you're very knowledgeable on it and stuff. So.
Well, I appreciate that, and so I'd love to get you back on in the future to discuss more public lands issues. Are you okay with that?
You bet. Anytime. You just let us know, Jim.
You see how I kind of trapped you while we're still recording to make sure you commit to a future recording?
That's okay. That's okay. I enjoyed the program and look forward to many more of them with you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Congressman, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Thank you.
You made it all the way to the end. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. We sure appreciate your support. This is Jim Huntsman signing off and reminding you to check us out at Instagram at The Western Huntsman and on Facebook at The Western Huntsman. And you can also check out the website at thewesternhuntsman.com. Thanks again. We'll see you guys next time. Stay Western, and I'll see you on the mountain.